Hey guys, Conor Brewster here with the Motion Visual. I got a bit of a different video here for you tonight. I'm here to talk about the true history of the first Thanksgiving. So like I said, my name's Conor Brewster, and I'm a direct paternal descendant of Sir William Brewster, who was a pastor and religious leader on the Mayflower. He was a Protestant and part of the separatist movement of English Christians who left Europe to escape religious persecution from the Catholics, who were the dominant Christian religion in Europe at the time. Protestants preferred a more personal and direct connection to God rather than one that was dictated by monarchies and the church. Not only was Brewster a religious leader and an elder on the Mayflower, but he was one of the key figures in organizing and leading the voyage and helping to shape the foundation of what would become the Plymouth colony. He was also the first man on Plymouth Rock. He's like my great-grandfather times 15 or 20 or 30 or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. Fun little fact, he had two sons named Love and Wrestling Brewster, which are some pretty cool names in my personal opinion. But anyway, I'm a direct patrilineal relation to him, and it's something I'm very proud of. I think it's important to honor his legacy and the half-century of peace that he established with Chief Massasoit and the Wampanoag people, who were the dominant confederacy of indigenous tribes in the Plymouth region of Massachusetts in 1621. When a strange ship appeared on their horizon. Now, some of you might have noticed the Virgin Mary behind me, and you may be thinking that's not very Protestant of me. So here's a fun little twist. My mom's side of the family is actually Irish Catholic, and her father's side is part of the Norris clan, who came to the New World during the potato famine in the 1800s. But here's where it gets interesting. On her mother's side of the family, there's another Mayflower passenger who was also a very dominant figure named Richard Warren. Richard Warren was not part of the religious groups like Sir William Brewster was, but he was just as essential to the success of the Plymouth colony. He was a merchant and trader from London and one of the strangers, as they were known, which were the non-separatist passengers of the Mayflower. He joined the voyage as a signatory of the Mayflower Compact, meaning that he was part of the group that established the colony's self-governance, which is a metaphorical ancestor of America's Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. Warren didn't bring his family at first, but his wife and his 5 daughters followed him 3 years later to the Plymouth colony, and Richard and Elizabeth Warren are among the Mayflower passengers who have the most descendants alive today in America, which is pretty amazing. So I have some pretty incredible Mayflower figures on both sides of my family. So on my dad's side of the family, there's a direct line to one of the colony's leaders and its spiritual heart, Sir William Brewster. On my mom's side of the family, there's a connection to this merchant and trader, Richard Warren, who was a practical thinker and a governmental philosopher. And I'm very proud of both of these things. It's my heritage, they're my ancestors, and a story gets told in a dark light sometimes. What I want to talk about tonight is these early settlers, people like Brewster and Warren, who built relationships with the indigenous people and how that led to the first Thanksgiving. It's a story that often gets stained with accusations of vicious colonization, but when you look deeper, we find a more complex and meaningful truth. One that created more than 50 years of peace, fraternity, and Thanksgiving harvest celebrations between the Pilgrims and the indigenous Wampanoag people in America. There were two races with completely different cultures and spiritual beliefs, and the Mayflower arrival to the Wampanoag people is the equivalent of an alien ship landing in downtown Manhattan today and establishing a beautiful, lasting peace with mankind, at least for a significant period of time. There's two sides to every story, and usually both are true. So I'm here to tell mine as I believe it to be, and I hope you'll tell yours in the comments below and where you think I'm right and wrong. And if you're interested in this kind of stuff, like and subscribe. I'd like to make more of these videos. I'm a big history fan, and I find a lot of this stuff very fascinating. So without further ado, let's dive into this story about the first Thanksgiving and the 50 years of peace and Thanksgiving celebrations that followed. The truth is that the Mayflower passengers and the Wampanoag, who were the indigenous confederation of tribes that lived in the area of Plymouth, Massachusetts at the time of the European arrival in the 1610s and early 1620s, had a very fraternal, brotherly, and peaceful relationship with the early settlers and the Mayflower passengers. And it was thanks to the indigenous people that the Mayflower passengers were able to survive their first winter in North America. They arrived during the fall of 1621, and many of them did die during the first winter, but thanks to the help of the Wampanoag and other local tribes, they were able to basically fully support the Mayflower passengers for their first winter. And the following spring, they taught them how to live on American land, especially how to grow corn and do things like use fish as fertilizer to grow other foods and just live off the land in North America. And they were able to do that for their first summer. And the first Thanksgiving was a celebration of the fraternal and peaceful relationship between the tribes and the first European Protestant settlers in Massachusetts who were coming to America to escape religious persecution. The Protestants wanted to have a more direct personal connection with God rather than having it through the church or through the Pope, essentially. But that's another story. So, like I said, Thanksgiving often gets a bad name, but the truth is the first Thanksgiving was a celebration of this beautiful relationship between these two races of people with totally different cultures and totally different religious beliefs and, basically nothing in common. And this relationship and this peace and this co-supportive living situation between the two of them lasted for half a century at least, before unfortunately descending to war and conquering like all mankind has always done throughout all of history. It's just unfortunately human nature. When there's not enough land and there's too many people, wars break out. It's been happening for forever. And it's not just the story of America, it's the story of humanity. And while it's ugly, it's also a beautiful thing because it represents our fight to live. And the Native Americans were very noble but very ferocious warriors for thousands of years, conquering each other and in constant warfare with opposing tribes in North America well before the Europeans ever arrived. And the Europeans, the Christians, were fighting the Muslims for thousands of years. And before that, it was the Romans fighting the Gauls. Before that, Alexander the Great and the Greeks fighting the Indians. And before that, Genghis Khan and the Hans and all these Byzantine empires and Constantinople and Mesopotamia and the Aztecs and probably tribes of people who were fighting over the land of the migration territory for woolly mammoths. So it's just a sad fact of life that eventually things break down. But what I'm here to talk about today is that the tradition of Thanksgiving is a beautiful one of fraternity. And it was a tradition that went on for 50 years in a very, very beautiful way. And my ancestors, who I feel the responsibility to both honor and take responsibility for their actions, were able to survive here thanks to the indigenous people. And I think it's a beautiful thing, and I think it's a story that needs to be told. So I'm going to tell you guys about it today. If you guys like this kind of thing, I don't do this very often, but please hit like and subscribe and let me know if this is interesting for you, because I'd love to make more stuff like this. I'm very proud of this this part of my heritage and history, and I think it's a beautiful story, like I said, that does need to be told. So let's get into it. This is the truth of the story as far as I understand it. And if you disagree, I really encourage you to make a video or respond in the comments and tell me how you feel about my understanding of the truth and what you think I got right and wrong. I'd really like to hear some more sides, especially if you have any indigenous heritage. That really would be meaningful to me. So yeah, here we go. So it starts off with the Mayflower voyage. So Sir William Brewster was an elder passenger and religious leader on the Mayflower. He was on board the ship with 101 other passengers and settlers who were coming from England and then later on Holland and then finally to North America to escape religious persecution and establish a colony over in North America. And William Brewster was one of the key leaders of the separatist movement, and he really embodied the Pilgrims' quest and desire for religious freedom. He was a scholar and served as a spiritual guide and a moral compass for the community. His leadership was vital, not only during the journey across the Atlantic, which was a very dangerous one, but also in establishing their new society in the New World and a relationship with the Wampanoag people. And while he was a religious leader, his actions and influence extended far beyond that. And he was the center of the Mayflower Compact, which was a formal peace treaty between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrim settlers. And he helped to really lay the groundwork for self-governance, which was a new idea that would echo through American history still to this day. Obviously, there were people living here already, but as more and more Europeans came over and started establishing what would later become the United States of America, they were able to do so in a way that was unrestricted by tradition. So they were kind of able to build a new culture that was free of monarchy and, basically everything you know about medieval to Renaissance age Europe. A lot of the reasons why so many countries had so much trouble getting civil rights and equal rights and human rights and freedoms was because there was such long traditions of monarchy and old order and separate classes that it was really difficult to kind of just start over from scratch. And that's something that the New World offered for the Europeans. And the Mayflower is really kind of the start of that. So David Brewster's leadership was crucial in navigating the early days of the Plymouth colony, particularly in the first winter as the settlers tried to grapple with the harsh realities of their new environment and the challenges of forming relationships with the indigenous people. There was actually some small European contact in the 10 or so years before the Mayflower arrived in Massachusetts, which unfortunately, not due to war, but was devastating to the Wampanoag people because they were exposed to all sorts of new diseases that they had never been exposed to, and it really decimated their population. But they still remained a very powerful confederacy of indigenous tribes in the area when the Mayflower did arrive. So when the Mayflower arrived in December of 1620, they entered a world that was totally shaped by the Wampanoag people. And this was under the leadership of Massasoit. He's a pretty well-known New England indigenous figure of the time. William Brewster was known for his sense of humility and conviction and was among those who recognized the importance of building trust with the Wampanoag and the indigenous tribes in the area which they landed. His guidance was a huge influence on these early interactions with the Wampanoag people and tribes. The arrival of Samoset and later Squanto, who were powerful chiefs of their people and actually knew some English due to the earlier European interactions, acted as diplomats, basically, or intermediaries or, translators in these early interactions. And this opened the door to a very historic meeting between Massasoit and the Pilgrims. And it culminated in European-style, Versailles-type peace treaty, a signed document. And the treaty was shaped by the leadership of Massasoit and Sir William Brewster, and they established terms of mutual protection and cooperation and peace and fraternity and brotherhood that would last over 50 years. Like I said, the Wampanoag were the only reason that these pilgrims were able to survive their first winter. They were the reason that they were able to learn to grow crops during their first spring and continue to grow them over their first summer and harvest them during their first fall in 1621. And the first Thanksgiving was a huge celebration of thanks to the Wampanoag and indigenous people from the Pilgrims for their help in their survival and the beautiful partnership that they had formed afterwards. So after a year of incredible hardship for the Pilgrims, they had successfully harvested crops with the guidance of Squanto and the support of the Wampanoag. and they invited Massasoit and 90 of his men, likely his warriors, to join them in a 3-day feast. And it was the marking of a moment of extreme gratitude for everything that they had done for the Pilgrims. And it was literally a Thanksgiving. It was a Thanksgiving. It was the Pilgrims trying to do their best with what little they had to show thanks to the indigenous people for everything that they had done for them. Because without them, they would all have died. They would all have died. They would not have lasted through their first winter. The first winter and the survival of the Pilgrims before they were able to grow crops themselves was all due to the extreme generosity of the Wampanoag. So when they finally were able to make their first harvest, they wanted to return the favor. And that's how the first Thanksgiving was established. And fun fact, if you watch Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving, they actually talk a little bit about both of these leaders and the first Thanksgiving. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty fun to see Charlie Brown, talk about my ancestors and my family. It's pretty funny. So William Brewster's role in this event and influence, probably made a huge impact on the way it was carried out. He was extremely spiritual, and his leadership likely led to the occasion with his profound sense of purpose and thanks for everything that the indigenous people had done. And his emphasis on gratitude and his deep respect for community would have resonated throughout the gathering, shaping it both as a religious and cultural milestone for this new world for the Europeans and this ancient land for the indigenous people, who had completely separate religious and spiritual beliefs. But at the end of the day, we all believe in the same God, It's all just one God. We just, unfortunately, fight over the way that we interpret him. But it's all the same. It's all the same God for all of us. At least that's what I believe. So this beautiful tradition of Thanksgiving made a huge impact on both sets of people, and they carried on not only their peace treaty and cohabitation and support of one another, but also the tradition of Thanksgiving for the next 50 plus years. And after these 50 plus years, there were more and more Europeans coming to settle, and Massasoit, the chief of the Wampanoag, passed away during this time. And his son, Metacom, who was known to the English, not as a chief, but as King Philip, took the mantle of leadership. And the Wampanoag now faced an increasingly aggressive European colony, with more and more people arriving from Europe every year. And the people that were arriving needed more supplies. They needed more land. They needed more of everything. And this is what leads to a lot of war and conflict throughout all of human history. So as the settlers started to claim more and more land, either through coercion or dubious legal agreements or, a relationship that was starting to strain beyond repair, King Philip's War, or Metacom's War, eventually broke out. And by the 1670s, tensions boiled over into a brutal conflict that devastated both the English and the indigenous people. There were many ferocious battles, and it was a vicious war. And the war, unfortunately, marked the end of the peace that figures like Brewster and Massasoit had worked so hard to establish, but more importantly, to preserve for as long as they could. And I just think it's a very beautiful thing. And 50 years of peace between two kinds of people who weren't neighbors like many European conflicts were. They were practically aliens to each other. They were completely new, totally different. And they had 50 years of beautiful peace and Thanksgiving celebrations and harvests. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And so, unfortunately, as more and more Europeans arrived, the consequences for the Wampanoag were catastrophic. Their society was fractured. Their tribes were scattered. Their trades were heavily disrupted by, the British and also people from all over: France, Spain, Italy, Ireland, Scotland, Russia, Norway, all over Europe. And unfortunately, this peace was fractured, and this beautiful tradition of Thanksgiving between the two peoples broke down. And the Europeans continued the tradition of Thanksgiving as a celebration, a harvest celebration, which is something that has been a very big European tradition for all of time. Halloween, Samhain, is an Irish example of this. It's a celebration of the harvest, preparation for the winter, a celebration for all that God has provided, and hopes and prayers that you're going to survive through the winter. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, which I love, fantastic. I think Florence Pugh is beautiful. I don't know why I had to say that, but it's true. And it's a dark movie, but it's another, Northern European kind of representation of this end of summer harvest, fertility type of celebration, which is what Thanksgiving became. So I think the true story and the true lesson that we can learn from the first Thanksgiving and the 50 years of Thanksgiving that followed is not that, Europeans and the white man are pieces of shit. It's just that as more and more people arrive and one type of people outnumbers another, conflicts break out. And unfortunately, cultures dominate each other out of the need for survival. And that's exactly what happened. But I think it's important to really honor this tradition and the truth of the peace that lasted for 50 years. And that's really the purpose of me talking about this video. And I think it's a huge, huge inspirational story and also a very, very cautionary tale. It teaches us that collaboration and mutual respect can achieve extraordinary things. And even in the face of immense challenges, that we can love and support each other. At the same time, it reminds us of the fragility of that peace and fraternity and the destructive consequences of greed and misunderstanding and imbalance, and how important diplomacy is for trying to keep the peace as much as possible, which I think is so relevant in America today. I think it's horrible that we're supporting these wars in Russia and Ukraine and in Palestine and Israel. I think we should be doing whatever we can to make peace happen in these places as early and as often as possible, instead of using it as a way to launder money and steal from the American taxpayer. It's disgusting. And we have so much to learn from the traditions and the generosity of the indigenous people. And that's one of the main reasons that remembering the truth of this first Thanksgiving is so important. And that's really the story I wanted to tell today. So, as we honor this history, I think it's important to let it inspire us to strive to emulate the best of what figures like William Brewster and Massasoit achieved. We should celebrate the moments of unity and the moments of fraternity, and we should learn from the failures that followed in the past. And in doing so, we can carry forth the true legacy of the first Thanksgiving. And a vision is and in doing so, we can carry forward the true legacy of the first Thanksgiving and a vision of what's possible when we come together with humility and respect and a shared commitment for a greater good for everyone and peace. And we should give thanks. We should give thanks for each other. We should give thanks for our family, for our friends, for all that God provides for us. Just realize that as hard as things get, that each and every day, while it's a struggle, and while it can feel like things are hard sometimes, we make it through it each and every day. We get by. We survive. We live. And when times are good, we live in moments of peace and thanksgiving. And we give thanks to each other. We give thanks to the earth. We give thanks to life and to love and to everything that's beautiful about this universe. And that, to me, is what Thanksgiving's all about. And I hope some of these things resonate with you. And I'd love to hear what you think about where I might be missing a point or misunderstanding what your idea of the truth about Thanksgiving and its history, and what you think about the whole situation. I'm really interested. So if you want to see more videos like this, I don't make a lot. So please like and subscribe, and let me know you like to see stuff like this, and I'll continue to make it happen. But more importantly, I'm looking forward to having some discourse in the comments. I know every YouTuber says that, but seriously, let's talk about this. Let's talk about why Thanksgiving is a beautiful tradition, why it holds a darker side, and what we can do to carry forth the legacy of all that's good and beautiful about it, while remembering all that went wrong and trying to avoid it in the future. So thanks. I'm Conor Brewster, 10, 20, 30-time great-grandson of Sir William Brewster, pastor of the Mayflower, first man on Plymouth Rock. This is the Motion Visual, signing off. Thanks for listening, guys. Happy Thanksgiving, and I will see you next time. God bless.